Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Core Data. This is the final one in this four-part series. We're going to be talking about CMS submission, tips, and tricks. And just by way of a quick introduction, I have a couple of esteemed panelists with me on the webinar. They're both practitioners, people that have submitted for a variety of companies, both this year and many years before. So first I want to introduce Chris Gringas. He's the president and CEO of MedComply. MedComply is a strategic partner for Core Data. And Chris has been a chief compliance officer in his past life and has built one of the most sophisticated HCP engagement platforms in the compliance space. Very pleased to welcome you, Chris, on this webinar with me today.
Thank you.
Okay, and I am Mohammed Awais, President and CEO of Core Data, and we've worked with over 30 life sciences companies to help them with their compliance solutions. And with me from Core Data side is Uzair Ansari. He's our delivery lead for reporting and aggregate spend, and over the last few years, he has worked with all of our customers in their reporting need to publish to CMS and create the final report for submission to both federal and state governments. Welcome, Uzair.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Okay, so as the title suggests for this last part in this four-part series, again, this is hosted as a webinar, more as a dialogue than as a presentation, but we do like to have a few slides up front to seed the conversation, get those interesting creative juices flowing. But just to set this expectation, we're looking for questions from our audience. If you do have a specific question around submission to CMS or any other part of the Open Payments and Sunshine Act reporting, do bring it up. You have an option to bring it up in the questions panel or through the chat, and I'll take it up with our panelists. I'm happy to even unmute you, so if you want to participate, we can have that live discussion as well. So in this fourth-part series, we're going to be talking specifically about what are some of the tips that we've learned as you go into this final lap of submission where you have to open up the CMS portal and get the report submitted. So both Uzair and Chris are going to talk about some of those tips that they found useful that has worked with our customers, and perhaps the audience on this webinar will find them useful as well. So with that, what I'll do is I'll hand it over to my colleague Uzair to walk us through some of the common mistakes that we should look at before we submit, and then go into from there quick on some of the tips for the submission. So Uzair, over to you.
Thanks, Mohammed. So yeah, before we jump right into this, I mean, I just want to talk about very quickly about this year, right? It's I think overall it's been very different from other years, right? And being on the vendor side, we're definitely seeing across the board, historically there's been the number of transactions that would have been there, they've dropped quite significantly across the industry, right? And that obviously means that the number of reportable transactions are going to go down, as well as the number of non-reportable. And what that also means is that the number of issues that you're going to encounter are obviously going to go down as well, right? Having said that, you still need to be wary of certain things before you submit, and that's why I've just jotted down some ideas over here, some things that you need to look out for. I'll go over them one by one. First of all, starting off with the duplicate transactions. And I call them potentially duplicates. I mean, when we're flagging them up, we flag them up as potential duplicates because you have to know the context behind these transactions. There may be certain items appearing in your data which are actually legitimately there, but when you look at them, you would think that they are duplicates. For example, if let's say someone submits an invoice containing meals of the same day. So the person had a donut in the morning, they had a donut in the afternoon, and they submitted the transaction together as part of one invoice, right? Um, so that's not actually a duplicate. But in other cases, when someone's entering that data in, they may just press the enter key twice without realizing that it's been submitted. So, and which may lead to a legitimate duplicate at that point, right? So it's always a good check just to see if you are able to spot them. Helps in preventing over-reporting of your data. The best way to do it, I would suggest, is through if you do have if a solution that helps you detect them automatically, obviously go for it. If not, there are ways that you can use free tools that are available on the internet, even to just for example, search through your data and spot duplicates, or just have a manual glance at the very least, right? Um, the other thing, if depending on how you are generating the data, uh, it's very common to have transactions from the previous year or from the next year appearing within your report. So make sure that when you are about to submit, just go through the date of transactions to make sure that you've got the right year in your data. So this specifically a case that comes to mind. What usually happens is that at, for transactions that come up in the later part of the year, you would have they would be submitted as part of, let's say, your January data files, right? In some cases, your reps return from, let's say, a holiday break, and then they gather up the data and they submit their December transactions and their January transactions together. You might just bunch them up together, um, and you don't want that because they're going to be flagged up before when you go to submit on the portal. Another thing, and this is something that can lead to a very serious issue, is managing the foreign currency exchange rate. So if you've got any transactions in your data which are outside of the US, uh, make sure that you have the currency noted down and the currency rate established in your data if they are not appearing in US dollars, so that the final number that comes up is in fact in US dollars. This can lead to a significant decrease or increase in the spend value depending on what the currency rate is. And finally, negative reconciliations, very common in systems which cater to HCP meals. For example, these occur. Negative transactions may occur because someone reverses a transaction within the system, or if they partially adjust the payment, right? So if in case they appear then and are not automatically adjusted as part of your report, then you might want to adjust them manually. And finally, we have $0 transactions. These are fairly common as well. They appear for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they may be system issues. At other times, they may actually be because of someone just putting a transaction down without putting the actual value in. They haven't got the value in, and then they forget to fill it in later, right? So these are just some of the kinds of transactions that do appear in your data, and it's easy to spot them provided that it's easy to spot them before you actually go on to submit. So I just want to flag them up.
Okay, that's good stuff, Jose. So let's continue with some of the, I guess, some of the tips and tricks that you might have.
Sure. So the next section actually covers the tips and tricks for when you actually go on to submit to the CMS portal, right? So what I was talking about previously was before you go on to submit. Now we're actually going to talk about what to do when you are accessing the portal. So if we can go on to the next slide, I have got a few pointers there. I'll start off with the first one. Fairly self-explanatory. Try to log in early before you go on to submit. The best time to do so would be right now, right, or within the next week. Make sure you've got your accesses sorted, because one thing that happens is due to inactivity, your account may become dormant, and you may need to call up the CMS to get it activated again. Passwords expire, I think, and yeah, the other thing that you want to make sure you've got sorted out is the roles for your users. So if someone is set up to be, make sure that you've got the right people set up to be submitters, the right people set up to be attesters and compliance officers. If especially if someone has recently moved on from your organization or has joined in, right, then they need to be set up. You don't want to do this later on in the month, because at that time it's too much of a hassle, in addition to the submissions that you're about to do. Um, Secondly, the next issue is, well, it's just leading on from this point. When you go on to actually submit the report, make sure you pick a nice time to do it, a time that you think would be where the system would be less busy. Right, the CMS portal, it does have a tendency to lag a fair bit. I'm not sure of the exact reasons why, but I'm assuming it's because of high traffic during those times. So if you've got the reports ready, make sure you get set up time, earlier on in the month to at least try and get some part of it in, right? So you don't have to do it towards the later end of the month. Definitely try to avoid the last day of the month if you can. That would be, I think, that would be obviously the busiest time. Uh, Next up, one issue that I've come across myself is, and I think this happens if you have an aggregate spend reporting system. If you have something that's generated directly out of a system, then you might want to avoid modifying the report manually, right? Because if you modify it and then you resave the report, it changes the encryption, I think, and that has actually caused the file from failing to submit, basically. So best practice, I would suggest, even if you want to make any addition, if any modifications, uh, do so in the system and then regenerate a report again, right? That's probably what I would advise. I know that people would be they would be quite well versed. So there might be people out there who are well versed with producing reports manually. I, for one, am not. So I don't. I'm not sure what exactly it is that causes it, but I've definitely seen the error appearing. Next, when you are able to submit the report, when it's accepted by the system, you would see the number of transactions rise, the number of transactions that are ready. But at the same time, the very first time that you're going to see, uh, you know, there would be a number of errors that appear as well. If you don't have any errors, right, you don't have anything to worry about. But in a lot of cases, uh, there might be a high number of errors as well, right? In some cases, you may just get lucky and have a few errors appearing. It definitely varies. When you have an extremely high number of errors, the first thing that you might want to think about is it's usually caused by an error that's appearing in all of your transactions, really. So for example, maybe you've spelled the company name wrong altogether, right? And that's appearing on all of your transactions. So if you have an extremely high number of errors, it could be due to something like that. um, if if you do have errors, but in a range between, let's say, 100 and 1,000 in number, I would suggest downloading the error log from the portal, having an error key to hand as well. You can download that off the portal as well, just and fixing the issues on your system rather than on the portal itself. Because um, if you want to fix something on the portal, you usually have to go through several steps in order to just fix one small issue, right? And then resubmit the transaction again. It's usually quite an arduous process, so I generally would avoid that if you have a high number of errors. um, Next, once you've sorted out you've managed to get the count down to, let's say, um, about 50 or so, right? Between 50 or 100, you might want to then switch on to fixing them on the portal itself. And at that time, the best way to go about it is to identify the number of errors that are the types of errors that are similar in nature. So if you have, let's say, states state issues, state license issues, then you might want to address them at once in one go. Then if you have NPI issues, then you might want to jump onto them next. If any other thing, so let's say product issues, for example, address them next, right? And the key is to, I would suggest, say, identifying patterns, right? So I've put down some of the, some of the cheat codes in my view that, that have helped me. And these, once you identify certain patterns, then, fixing them becomes fairly quick, right? So for example, with some common issues that I've put down on the slides, NPI matching issues. So if you're not able to find the right NPI for a person, you've tried multiple iterations, you've tried multiple times to get the NPI in, but you're not able to do so, just try removing the NPI, because that that has worked for me as well, right? It's because it may be that something's updated on the validated physician list, for example, which hasn't yet been reflected on your report. The NPI may have become deactivated, or after the list was published, for example, something along those lines, right? Or you may just have put it down. You may just have put it down after a manual attempt, um, before you submit it, and that's caused it. Another common issue is to do with state licenses, and here I've put down the example of California state licenses. California state licenses have a prefix before a prefix alphabet before the number. So if it would be in the format CA hyphen A followed by the number, right? And that's how it appears on the NPI registry. That's how it appears in the various different sources. But when you go on to submit, for some reason, CMS doesn't like that. So what's worked for me is I've removed the A from there, I've removed the alphabet from there, and that's usually caused the transaction to go in successfully. Uh, Product issues do appear, and they don't have the most user-friendly error messages for products. So for this, I would suggest trying a couple of quick things. First of all, if your product is non-covered, then the CMS is expecting you to not fill in the name of the product and the associated details, right? So if you've got that filled in, you might want to remove it and try submitting that, right? Another issue that appears with products is that if you've got product 1 filled out, and then you've got product 2 fields appearing as well, and they're blank, then that might mean that there's a space in one of the fields, which is causing that extra section to appear. So try just checking to see if there's any spaces over there. So those were just some of the tips that I had for CMS submissions, right? When you're actually on the portal, I hope they help you. I'm going to pass on to Chris. I think he has some to share as well.
Thank you, Uzair. So before we move over to the top 10 tips that Chris has, if there is any questions or additional clarification, and if nothing else, we'd love to hear where you are in the process, if you've been able to get the report submitted, or if you're still working through it. Let us know in the comments section or the questions. Love to know where the audience members are. So with that, I'll move to Chris. Chris, if you can take us through some of the tips that you have learned in your experience in submission to CMS.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Uzair. Those were some great tips, and I'll touch on one or two of those in my list as well. Mine are a little bit less technical and more from a sort of compliance management business perspective, but and I'll kind of go through these at a high level. But as you kind of prepare and submit your data to CMS, look at the data and think about, are there any transactions that you should be proactively reaching out to your healthcare professionals with an alert or notice? Like if you're reporting a $100,000 transaction to a doctor for a royalty payment that was kind of unusual, maybe you want to reach out to that doctor and give them a heads up that this is going to become publicly available. Most doctors honestly don't really care, but it's good to look at it from a different perspective. And there could be some transactions that you want to give a heads up to your doctor, things like ownership, large dollar value. So just a different way of looking at the data. So you want to make sure none of your doctors are surprised. Another tip is, and this gets back to Azair, and this is really critical. Do people actually remember their username and password to log into the system? You know, has the person left the company? So you kind of want to do this like now, so that in a week or two you're not struggling and you're trying to get a person to remember their password, having to call the help desk. And I always recommend, not that you want to have a lot of people, but you should have backups for every role, just in case, right? Somebody's on vacation or they get ill. You don't want to be dependent upon just one person. But definitely now is the time to check if they can actually log into the system, and then they can fix that now. And sort of like this kind of relates to bullet one, but if you have any unusual transactions, I recommend contextual information. So there's no requirement to do this, but if you do have any unusual transactions, I think there's value in adding a little bit of a story. Why is this transaction so large? Why were there so many frequent transactions? Because we definitely know that the government, the Department of Justice, is going to be reviewing this data. So I'd rather them understand the transaction versus them having to call me and saying, hey, Chris, tell me about this transaction. I'd rather them know that this $100,000 payment to a doctor was for a medical director, not a large consulting payment for them to use my product. So again, just look at any unusual transactions that might require some contextual information, not a requirement in any way. And it's the same with the assumptions document. No requirement to submit an assumptions document, but if you are making some assumptions, or you're categorizing and grouping payments, or you're putting things in a certain category and you're making decisions, it is good to put that in writing in an assumptions document. So again, the government can look at this and understand why you made the reports you did. And I think that's going to protect you in the future in a year or 2 years or 3 years, if they ever do look at your data and say, hey, why did you do it this way? Well, I did it this way because of this. And I told you I did it that way. This should be good. So again, not a requirement, but I think it's a nice thing to do. I always recommend spot checking transactions. So this is one of those things that I always do. Just things disappear for some reason. I don't know, but like when I generate the report, when I upload it to Excel, I always like to check like, you know, maybe 10 or 20 transactions, large dollar, random transactions. If I uploaded the file, are those in the CMS system? So again, no requirement, but it's nice to spot check a few transactions. After I'm done uploading the data, I always recommend setting up like a folder, a shared drive with all the data that you uploaded, like your files that you actually uploaded to the system. I like to export the file as well from the CMS system. So it just creates all these different versions of backups, like what I put into the system and what is in the system. It's just a good thing to do. And then the next year, you always have this running history of data that you've uploaded. And it's good from an audit perspective as well. The other thing I recommend, and if you have any interest, you can reach out after. I'm happy to provide this, but prior to attestation, I like to develop a sort of checklist that I have other people within the company sign off on. So this kind of is sort of similar to like Sarbanes-Oxley, financial statement sign off. The president of the company or another officer of the company is going in and attesting to that data. You can provide some comfort to that attester that other people are attesting as well to that data. So, you know, the president, hey, I'm not the only one going to go to jail because all these other people signed off on the data as well. So this is very similar to like the Sarbanes-Oxley model, and I can provide some examples if there's interest. But it's kind of a nice thing to do to go out to like the head of sales, the head of finance, the marketing department, and just have them all sign off and say, yep, this is the correct data and everything is in here is accurate. And then the eighth item on the list is identify educational opportunities. So if there's any data that's wrong, like I'm busy, I don't have time to deal with it now, but I'm going to put that aside. And then in April, I'm going to go back to these sales professionals that had the $250 meals and have a conversation. I'm going to go back and say, hey, you didn't include product, NPI number, you picked the wrong doctor. So I always try to put those things aside. And then in April, I can do an educational session with them. The ninth item on here is like in the military, we always do an after action report. So anytime we have an exercise or an event, you're always looking at it and asking and documenting immediately after, like what went right and what went wrong, so that you can learn from that in the future. So there's things that you're going to do, like it's sort of like Uzair, he's sharing all these little tips, like put those down. Like I always, like you're like after you're done, you're just so happy you just never want to think about it again. But that's when you need to be disciplined and say like, oh, I'm going to write all these things down, because there's always these, like a year later, I'm like, oh, I totally forgot I did this. But if you can be disciplined and document all these lessons learned, that's beneficial. And then the last thing is really celebrate your success. So, you know, as a compliance officer, there's not a lot of opportunities to talk about how amazing we are and how hard we work. So this is your opportunity to go out to the leadership team of the company and the board and say, look, you know, we you know, reported 5,000 transactions to CMS. So again, I think this is a great opportunity to talk about all the hard work you did. And don't just talk about the number of transactions you reported. You want to kind of embellish the number and say, like, I looked at 100,000 transactions and then I was able to pull out 5,000. So the numbers look bigger if you look at the entire Excel file. So that's okay to do. It's still ethical. You did do that. So, but I think that's really important to go back to the board and the leadership team and say, we did this, and we look at all these transactions and the numbers. So this is a great opportunity, I think. And so don't waste that opportunity to, you know, celebrate all the hard work that you did to get all this data, because it is a lot of hard work to do this. And it's pretty stressful sometimes when the report doesn't go through and you expect it to. So those are some top 10 tips. And then just one other quick thing too, I guess a bonus tip is the other thing I'm seeing a lot of with the pandemic year is a lot of like transactions have been canceled. Like, so like a lot of flights for doctors were canceled. So that gets really confusing, because I think you were talking about this year, there might be like reconciliations to this data. So like you didn't really have a $10,000 flight, somewhere else it was canceled. And how do you match that? I'm seeing a lot of that now that you don't really see. So just something else to think about as you're going through the file. Is to, you know, if the flight was canceled, to don't report that transaction and make sure it's removed. So.
Thank you, Chris. Great tips, and we've already had a request for your cascading audit checklist. I know I've seen this in larger companies, but the audience members would like to have that, so we can coordinate sending it after we're done here. So we've covered kind of both from a technology perspective on what you should look at when you go get ready to submission into the portal. We've also looked at from a business perspective on some of the things that you should take into account as you go into this submission cycle, including looking for transactions for duplicates, currency conversions, negative, zeros, high transactions that you want to mark and maybe proactively communicate to your HCPs, or add contextual information, put it into your assumptions document. So a variety of ways that you can take action while you have time between now and when you get the reporting done. And if you're going to do the cascading checklist or attestation for different groups in the organization, then you have to be ready a lot earlier, because you want to get those signatures before your final attester will be looking at the data to get it signed. So with that, I think we've covered a lot, and we've come to our 30 minutes. This was the last session within the 4-part series that we were running, and hopefully everyone has a great time submitting to CMS, and we look forward to seeing you on the other side. But if there is any questions, any confusion, anything that you need help with between now and when you get done with reporting, do reach out. We'll do what we can to help you and provide any guidance or tips or help out in any other capacity. Thank you for joining in. As always, thank you, Uzair and Chris, for your great thoughts and presentations, and thank you everyone on the webinar.
All right.
We'll see
Thank
you
you,
next time.
Mohammed. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye.